Now, short of prodigies, we do see examples of skills,
yes.
real skills. And these skills are in some ways almost more interesting because they emerge sort of full blown, and they aren't just tendencies towards something which is then nurtured through practice until it becomes something.
Well, the acquisition of a full-blown skill, I would think, would count as evidence against what we referred to in our previous interview as the living agent psi hypothesis, because having a skill is not the same as acquiring information through clairvoyance.
No, I don't think it is either. There are philosophers who, however, claim that it might be possible to do that, but I don't know. I'm quite skeptical of that argument, frankly. I don't see much evidence of it. I mean, that is reaching into what we talked last time about super psi. We're moving beyond what the level of psi that can be demonstrated in the laboratory to something we have to imagine, an imagined capability, and sort of imagine that if that capability is developed in a certain way, then that perhaps would explain this. But I just think a simpler explanation, once we can agree, if that's possible, that reincarnation is a viable explanation of these cases, it becomes much simpler than to simply accept that that the skills are somehow carried over.
Well, what are some of these prodigious skills?
I wanted to give you an example of them. There was a Brazilian boy who recalled having been his sister. And he was a large family, 13 children, I think, as I recall. And he, the sister who had killed herself, saying she wanted to be a boy next time, was the only one in the family who had really was really adept at sewing, at operating a sewing machine. Well, he also was very adept at his sister's sewing machine, the only other member of the family, only other child of the family who was. And is one of Stevenson's cases, one of the cases he investigated. And he learned on one occasion when a family servant was having trouble threading the machine. He was, less than 4, I think, at the time. Pushed her out of the way and showed her how to thread the machine, and so. When you see something like that, like a fully developed skill, emerging that way in a very young child, who's had no training. In fact, he never, he didn't want training. He said he already knew how to sew. He already knew how to operate the machine, and he showed that he did. I mean, he would finish some of his older sister's work.
I see. And are there other such examples?
I think there's a Tlingit example of a boy who was very adept at boat motors.
Now, Tlingit is a Northwest Indian tribe.
Alaskan. And the person he recalled had liked to be on the water. He'd been a fisherman, and he also had been very good at boat motors. And this young kid was remarkably adept at it. In fact, when his father was having trouble with a motor once, he stepped in and took care of the problem. So. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I gather, though, that the predominant behavioral memory that comes up in these cases would tend to be a phobia.
I think that's fair to say, yes. And we see phobias especially when death was violent. That is, the previous person died violently. The child will show some phobias that are consistent with that. They can be quite extreme sometimes. In fact, Erlinda Haraldson, my co-author of the book you mentioned earlier, likens it to post-traumatic stress disorder. So the children, it's as if the children are demonstrating the sorts of reactions that you would expect them had they lived rather than died.
So the phobia is related to the specific cause of death of the previous person.
That's right.